This week I'm firing up the old Nintendo Switch. That's right, I'm hopping back on my Nintendo Switch and we're checking out the world of XEL. So this week I'm checking out action platformer XEL on the Nintendo Switch from developer TinyRoar. Let me tell you, this is a pretty interesting game. It is a Zelda-like action adventure where, we are following protagonist Reed, who has crash landed on the planet of XEL. And unfortunately, she has some amnesia. And the idea is to put the puzzle pieces together and try to understand why you're on this planet and what your objective is. And you're going to go through dungeons and bosses and different kinds of puzzles along the way. And this is kind of where you get that, Zelda feel. And I'm not going to do a straight comparison to the game because honestly these games are fairly far apart. This game is available on all platforms. It is just under $20. It's about $18 on the Steam store and the Nintendo eShop. This is one of those games where I think your $20 could possibly be spent better somewhere else, but there are people that are going to like this style of game. Unfortunately, on the Nintendo Switch platform, though, there is a ton of issues. And when I say issues, I'm not talking about small stuff. Some of this stuff is very glaring and makes the experience of playing the game a little bit more difficult. Before we get into some of the negative things, I do want to talk about some of the positives of this game. It is a sub $20 game for an action-adventure game that actually is going to give you quite a bit of content as you go along. There is quite a bit of gameplay here. It is somewhat challenging, but that is kind of nice. The fact is that there are only a few pros about this game. The voice acting is definitely one of them. I enjoyed the voice acting of Reed, the main character, and the other characters you run along the way. It brings a little bit more life to the story here opposed to just reading dialogue boxes, so I actually thought that was really well done.
Collection of who she is, or even where she comes from, boss.
Hey, this is kind of personal info and you just spilled it all in front of your cult.
Unfortunately, the list of cons kept piling up the longer I played this game. And when you're looking at a game like an action adventure like this, combat plays a big role here. And on the Nintendo Switch, the combat just seems so chunky. There's frame rate issues, there's things popping in, popping out. It's just the Nintendo Switch is showing its age here. And this is a game that's kind of pushing it maybe a little farther than it should. But honestly, I played Zelda Breath of the Wild and that game still looks amazing on the Nintendo Switch. This game, unfortunately, feels like maybe it was optimized for the other platforms and then ported over the Switch, and now it's having some difficulties because honestly, when you're playing a game where you have to fight enemies basically every room you go and the combat is chunky, it feels kind of disjointed. I mean, you're swinging your sword, some hits are registering, some hits aren't, and you only have so much health, so you end up dying. And the save points, let's get the save points here. You can't just auto save this game. You have to make it to certain save points. Mind you, they are plentiful. You do run into quite a few, but you have to be strategic about kind of which save points you're using before, boss battles, or you're going into a dungeon or something like that. So there's a few things you got to consider here, and it just made it kind of difficult to, really want to keep going, especially when I'm sitting here swinging my sword and I'm not, hitting the hits I'm thinking I'm supposed to be getting here against enemies, and now I'm taking damage, and now when I finally get to the boss, I don't have enough hearts to keep going, enough health, and it's unfortunate because you do pick up food along the way, but then you have to find a kind of a campfire to be able to cook that food. That mechanic was actually done really well. I like being able to cook different kinds of food and have it on you. This was kind of the breaking point for these boss battles. If you didn't have enough health to just kind of regen during these boss battles, you weren't going to have a tough time. You're going to, run into issues where, you're not necessarily going to be able to defeat that boss unless you have health. And on the flip side, if you have a ton of food that's been cooked and ready to eat, you can sit there and just basically spam attack, taking hits from the boss and just re-upping your health. I mean, there's kind of a level of repetitiveness when it comes to how all the combat kind of plays out. And I just felt, it was just a little too lackluster, in my opinion, for how this game I thought should have played out, especially in the combat section. So to say the least, my time with XEL has been lackluster. It hasn't been as fun as I wanted it to be, especially for an action-adventure game that is so combat-based. I mean, the issues this game has on the Nintendo Switch platform, unfortunately, is what's going to hold you back. Even for $20, there's a lot of game here, and I just don't think the value's there. Unfortunately, they're coming out with different updates for the game and patches and things like that, so maybe some of this graphical stuff will be fixed on the Nintendo Switch in the future, but as it stands right now, this is a subpar game as far as what you should expect from a game in this genre. So I'm gonna have to give it a 4.5 out of 10.